Hey, are you a high achiever who struggles with perfectionism? Do you get stuck in the cycle of overthinking? Do you do everything for everyone else because you think otherwise it won't get done? Do you feel like you should come with a disclaimer? Hi, I'm anxious. Hey, I'm Katy. Full disclosure, I'm not a therapist, doctor, or mental health professional. I'm just a career mama who also struggles with anxiety. For me, anxiety reared its head at the most inconvenient times when I wanted to be present with my family, at those high pressure business meetings, when I was laying in bed awake at night worrying instead of sleeping. I just wanted to relax and be able to have fun, and I know that you do too. What if you found tools to manage your anxiety? What if you knew how to enjoy life even though you are anxious? Look, it's time to put down that third cup of coffee and swap it for some lemon water. We're going to get control over anxiety so it can stop controlling you. Let's go, girl. Sweet Anxious High Achiever, welcome to the High and Anxious podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I know that at the time that this podcast episode airs, it is the busy holiday season, and I know as an anxious high achiever, you are probably in the thick of it right now. And I feel like it's the perfect time to talk about the topic that I want to discuss today, and that is overthinking, which is a topic that we've talked about a number of times here before on the podcast. And I know that this resonates with you because in the episodes where I talk about overthinking, I have way more downloads than others in general. And also, it's a topic that comes up in conversation with other anxious high achievers. And it's also something that I see hints of in my Facebook group. And so today, what I want to do is not do any teaching, but talk about ways that overthinking might show up in your life, which I suppose could be teaching to you if you didn't already recognize the ways that it's showing up for you. Or notice that those ways, even if you saw them showing up, notice that they might be symptoms or signs of overthinking. So I'm going to run through a list of ways that I have seen overthinking come up for me and other anxious high achievers that I've worked with. And I want you to be thinking about them. And I want you to spend some time this week thinking about how does overthinking come up for you in your life specifically. And I think that it will help you to get as specific as you can by, for example, noting down a, as explicit of detail as you can muster how the overthinking is showing up in your life. When you're thinking about something, what you're thinking about it, how much time are you noticing you're spending on it? And I know that that might be tough, but just do your best to make note, pen and paper, where this is showing up for you. And then in next week's episode, we're going to talk about what to do next once you have identified specifically how overthinking is showing up for you in your life. So I think the first way might be dwelling on the past. Now, typically, I think as anxious souls, we're forward focused, but I know that sometimes this can come up for us in that we use it to worry about what might come up again in the future that might be negative. So, for example, maybe you had a conversation with a colleague that went poorly. And you can't let it go in your mind because you want to keep playing it over again and again and again, probably beating yourself up for how you could have done better in that conversation. Another way might be thinking about decisions that you've already made and second guessing them. So, should I have gone to Cabo instead of Mexico or instead of Jamaica? I don't know. I'm just trying to give you some examples of silly things that have come up again for me or those I've been in conversation with. Should I have bought those sweatpants or not? I really didn't need any sweatpants, but I bought them anyway. And I told myself I'd be saving money, but they looked really comfy. And my other ones are getting kind of ratty, but I did have some and I didn't really need any. So, second guessing decisions that you've already made. I think related to the first one I talked about, dwelling on the past, also, I think rehashing or replaying mistakes that you may have made, or I'll say perceived mistakes, can be a way that overthinking can show up in our lives. Like, oh, how could I have been so stupid? I'm never going to do that again. Instead of just learning the lesson and moving on, you dwell on it and repeat it in your mind again and again and again for whatever reason. Oftentimes, I think also beating yourself up for it in the process. Also, I think fixating on things or ruminating on things, which is maybe synonymous for overthinking, but definitely part of overthinking. So, what are things that you have in your life that you can't necessarily change? So, I think that this is something that we as anxious high achievers really struggle with. And I've talked about it before because as a high achiever, you are capable of so much that you may think that there are things that are within your control that aren't necessarily. And we've talked about this concept before too, finding your controllables versus your non controllables. So we can get stuck, I think, sometimes thinking about things that we wish we could control, but really aren't within our control. And oftentimes I see this come up for people within relational issues like, oh, if I could just get my husband to understand, if I could just get my kid to see, if I could just help my colleague understand this project, then I could dot, 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 dot. So as I give those examples, I'm guessing you're able to think of some ways for you that this has shown up before. Also, I think that sometimes catastrophizing or thinking of worst case scenario can show up for us. So sometimes that's helpful, right? Like you need to plan for contingencies in some situations. If this project goes south or doesn't work out, what are my next steps going to be? Or I've got a plan for this weekend, but what happens if somebody gets sick? Here's what I'm going to do as a backup. So think about times in your life where you're going to the worst case scenario, but overdoing it to the point where it's just not helpful. You're not coming up with a backup plan and moving on. You're worrying and worrying and worrying about the worst thing that could happen and working yourself into a frenzy over it rather than planning for it and moving on or acknowledging it that it could happen and moving on. I think also something that comes up for us as anxious high achievers is usually at night, either when you're trying to fall asleep or you've woken up and then you can't go back to sleep. And what do? You think about your to do list. Oh, I forgot to do XYZ. I need to write that down. Oh, maybe I should get up and take care of this, blah, blah, blah. I'm awake anyway. I forgot to do it and I need to get it done. So pay attention to how often in your life you are maybe tuning out conversations you're having with people because you're thinking about the things you have to do. Your kids talking to you, trying to tell you about their day, and instead you're thinking, all right, I need to get dinner in the oven, and then I need to get ready for bath, and then blah, 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 blah. And again, I think for anxious high achievers, I see this come up a lot around nighttime when you're trying to fall asleep. And then finally, I want to mention, I think maybe the one that is most common that I have experienced and or heard about from others, and that is deciding what to do or deciding whether to do something. So making decisions around decision making. Do I save this money or do I buy XYZ? Do I take this job or that job? Do I go to the gym or do I have a movie night with my kids? Like, what am I going to do? And I think that this is where we, as anxious, high achieving women, tend to get hung up the most because we do a lot of shoulding on ourselves. Well, I should get to the gym, but also you want to spend time with your family. In that scenario I mentioned about going to the gym or having a movie night with your family, saying that, I'm guessing I can hear what your mind is starting to tell you when you think about that for yourself. I know for me, it should be a simple decision, but I can see how something like this would really make me struggle and has made me struggle in the past. And it's something that I hear high achieving women talk about a lot too, decision making around whether to spend time on themselves or their family, what to do with their time. I think that decisions surrounding how to spend time is a big one for us because our time is limited and tends to be accounted for so much of the time that it's hard for us to make decisions around how to spend blocks of our time. especially when it might be something that we feel like we shouldn't do because we like to should ourselves. You should do this, you shouldn't do that, don't we? So that's what I've got for you today, sweet anxious high achiever. I hope that as I was giving some examples, maybe that prompted you to see how overthinking is coming up for you in your life, especially if you haven't noticed it before. And I'd like you again to spend some time this week, paper and pen, just jotting down some ways that you are seeing overthinking come up for you in your life. And then I want you to come back next week because we're going to talk about next steps. And in the meantime, sweet anxious high achiever, if you're not already a member of my Facebook group, please come join. The link to join is in the show notes. It's an incredible community full of sweet, anxious souls just like you, high achieving, incredible women who are there to support one another, to encourage one another, and to maybe sometimes have a little bit of fun too. I'd love to have you in the group. Again, the link to join is in the show notes. Thanks so much for being here with me today, and I can't wait to talk with you next week. Bye. Hey friend, thanks for being here. Did today's episode help you feel more in control of your anxiety? Did it inspire you to rest or relax? Or maybe it challenged you to really look at why anxiety is a part of your life? If so, I'd love to hear from you. If you would take 30 seconds, pause this episode, scroll down in Apple Podcasts, and leave me a review, I would be so grateful. See you next week. Disclaimer, I am not a medical professional, and this podcast is not providing therapy or medical treatment. Contents of the podcast are for informational purposes only and are not a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always consult your healthcare provider with your health questions and concerns.